This is Inspiring Minds, a podcast focused on thought-provoking conversations between BSB students and our world-class faculty.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of Inspiring Minds here within the Villanova School of Business. My name is Dan Bernardi. I am a senior marketing major and political science minor from Normal, Illinois, and I am joined here today by Laeka Brenninkmeyer, senior finance major from St. Augustine, Florida, interviewing Dr. Myers, the assistant professor of management and operations here at VSB.
Thank you for that intro, Dan. So Dr. Myers, would you please share with me a little bit about kind of your path to sports analytics and then how that shifted into your role right now in consulting with Toronto FC?
Sure. Well, I think it began with reading the book Moneyball and just having an interest in analytics and sports, but then just thinking in the sport I love the most, which is soccer. Mm-hmm. So I was at Villanova at the time and thought of a research idea, which was to look at optimal times to make substitutions. As you know, there are only 3 maximum substitutions that can be made in an official international game. And so, what is going through the manager's head before making that decision? I used some data mining techniques and found that there were some critical splits when teams were behind. If they made their subs at the 58th, 73rd, 79th minute, that they could get an advantage. So I put that research into a paper, and it actually featured in the Wall Street Journal. And that sort of led to some bigger opportunities. Mm-hmm. I presented at the 2013 MLS Combine in front of all coaches, a lot of front office staff people from all the teams in the league. And it just made the most sense coming out of that I would work with Philadelphia.
What did you find specifically about substitution? Was it more so based upon the specific time which the substitution was made, or more so the amount of substitutions, or kind of the factors about how much they were losing by? Or
So when I looked at the problem, I wanted to look at just some basic properties about substitutions first. Mm-hmm. So I just looked at, in general, when teams on average make the first, the second, the third sub, kind of the frequency of matches where no subs were made, 1 sub, 2 sub, 3 subs. I think in general, what I was seeing that it seemed to make a lot of sense to always use 3 subs. If it's always a choice of, should I use all 3 or something below that you should be using all 3. And then what was kind of in my head and kind of how I approached that study was this phenomenon of the super sub and how fresh legs can come in and impact the match. So the conclusions I reached were very specific towards the game state, whether you were tied behind ahead, and the only significance that I found was when teams were behind.
Right.
That was when you wanted to kind of follow that rule, and teams that did follow this procedure were like doubling their likelihood of getting back into the game. So to kind of get technical here, kind of had this like binary target variable. Either you improved your goal differential or you didn't. In a lot of cases, it was going from -1 to getting a tie, or going from -1 to +1, or even if you get yourself like -2 to -1, that's putting you back into the game, and you still have that opportunity to win.
Can you share a little bit about some of the responsibilities you've had in the MLS, specifically with the union, and also now working in analytics with Toronto FC?
Sure. My responsibilities have evolved a bit, because when I began with the union, at that point I was just very content and happy to finally have an opportunity to impact a club. Usually in analytics type positions, you're hired by front office people, a GM, maybe even an ownership group. But the coach actually had hired me, so he wanted to use me kind of as another resource for match preparation. So if we had a match on Saturday, I would make sure that I would have a report prepared to him by Tuesday or Wednesday at the latest, with strengths and weaknesses of the opposition, breakdowns of trends and key statistics, and what it would look like when that team had success versus it's a wins, draws, losses type splits, home versus away. And so that he was better informed. And it was a nice contrast to what he was getting from his coaches, who would just watch video and chart things that they were noticing about players. And that's really where this approach can add value, is because when I was making the conclusions, if we're trying to assess like how technical a player is on the opposition, like his passing tendencies, maybe a player makes like 30 passing attempts a game, and we have 10 games, and so I can assess him on 300 passes, which through video, a coach is not going to be able to necessarily zero in on that. And it was sort of nice for the coach to kind of have that balance. And so if he was thinking in a particular direction, he would sort of have this further confirmation if both his sources were pointing in the same direction. But if there was a kind of a mixture where maybe the traditional scouting was suggesting kind of one direction, where my scouting was suggesting another, it maybe led him to ask further questions and maybe to have a bit of a dialogue with me or dialogue with the coaches or both. And then being hired by the general manager of Toronto, which I should disclose that he was a former teammate and friend of mine. But, he felt like it was justified. I had already been working with another team.
Right.
I had much more of a comprehensive role with that team. So it was not only involving myself in sort of the opposition scouting and what goes on the field, but kind of the overall roster evaluation, kind of looking at trends in the league, key performance indicators to look for both teams and players. How can Toronto FC become one of the super clubs in MLS? And then what would that look like from a performance standpoint? What are the typical characteristics of playoffs versus non-playoff teams? And what are characteristics of MLS champions? And so, you wonder, how does this impact the club? I don't know if we can scientifically prove how analytics is helping a team win, but what we can hang our hats on is that the team has every year gotten better. We went from being one of the worst teams in the league perennially to now we were in the playoffs for the second straight year, made it all the way to MLS Cup final, was one penalty kick away from winning that championship. So it's been a great project. And for every successful case there is like that, there's a Bruce Arena who gets up in a press conference and just kind of lays into how he doesn't feel that analytics has any meaning in soccer. And it also maybe invites more opportunity. If there's more skeptics out there, there's more opportunity for a competitive advantage. If you really believe that what you're doing can help and it can lead to wins, if there's less people that are out there in competition doing the same thing, then it's a bigger opportunity. So, and I will say that there is an artistic side to soccer. I mean, you have to put together a team of 11 on the field and, a roster that's greater than that, and you have to work together. Baseball, maybe that team chemistry isn't as significant. I think it takes a lot. It's still very much on the coach's shoulders to deal with the different personalities and make sure that what was intended on paper can come to fruition.
Can you just share a little bit about kind of the landscape of analytics, whether it be specifically in soccer or in other sports, and where you see it going, kind of opportunities and kind of threats to what you've done?
Technology is going to continue to improve the amount of data that is being collected, kind of ways in which you can process that data and get information from it. In every sport, and this is even kind of get into different clubs, is you've got to kind of find the balance there, because I don't think that we're going to ever get to a point where it's 100% analytics data driven. It's still important to have those people skills, that balance of an art and science of team building, and finding that balance and understanding very specifically where the data is going to help you. Because what it's going to look like, this is the way I see it, is that every team has an analytics department. It's, one of the things that naturally you want to do, whether that's on the sporting side of your organization or on the business side. You need to have people that are good with manipulating data. So it doesn't become this issue of, because we're the only ones doing analytics, therefore we're going to have an advantage. It becomes this battle of what clubs can do the best analytics and find competitive advantage in the most situations.
So that's fascinating within analytics and in sports in general. And I know as Villanova fans, the 2016 National Championship was something that was unprecedented in terms of how people viewed that game leading into it. It seems like every time Villanova goes to the National Championship, they don't think we're gonna win. It happened in 1985, happened again in 2016. So I guess I was just interested, Dr. Myers, in your experience within analytics and Jay Wright's strategy going into it. How do you think he handled everybody's doubts, specifically regarding the players that he selected and the team that he has built within the 2016 National Championship team? I'm interested in your views on that.
I know that analytics has been a part of what he's built. And what I find interesting is that there's maybe this general idea in basketball about analytics that it's going to be these real advanced box score statistics that you have an effective field goal percentage that's different from a raw shooting percentage, and we got to find players that achieve well. But what he's done is that he's taken attitude. He has taken that and thought about what does that mean and how can we measure that. With his staff, very detailed about how they chart and break down what are the variables that constitute attitude. And so I think the way in which he has continued to evaluate his players and his team is to think about those key performance indicators that reflect attitude and come up with his recipe to what success is. And when it comes to analytics, it's just kind of one form of a lot of different diligence that goes into building a successful team and winning a national championship.
Thank you very much, Dr. Myers, for being with us this morning. On behalf of Laeka and myself, we greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Inspiring Minds. Stay tuned for our next installment featuring more VSB students discussing research topics with our world-class faculty.